unwritten purge rule, Sergeant. Don't save lives. Tonight we take lives. We make things manageable for us. Unfortunately, the citizens aren't killing enough. So we supplement it all to keep things balanced. It's important work the NFFA does, and we can't have any interference. Can't have heroes. Blessed be America, a nation reborn.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power!
You're listening to The Fear of God, a podcast exploring the intersection between Christianity and the horror genre. Hello and welcome to the Fear of God podcast, where we explore every single week that mysterious intersection between Christianity and the horror genre. We want to specifically welcome you to the next installment of that wonderful conversation about the franchise known as The Purge. If you will recall, my name is Reed Lackey, and the last time we had a conversation about The Purge, I sort of exorcised these homicidal impulses, and I got rid of my co-host, Mr. Nathan Rouse. I just purged him. But this time around, we were actually driving somewhere, and our car broke down because we've been working on our whole, friendship thing, and so then, we were stuck out in the middle of nowhere when The Purge happened this time around, and so this time we're actually on the same side, which means, hi Nathan, welcome to the show.
Reed, oh my God, look out!
See, I'm trying to sort of make recompense for all of my, like in Freddy versus Jason, I just straight up resurrected you, and now, like we're teammates instead of because I got a little heat for always killing you off every single time I introduce an episode. So well,
I appreciate remaining amongst the living. So, thank you for that.
No problem. Hey, buddy.
Hey, man. So we're finishing up a 3-week number 2.
Can I just say,
what?
I don't know if I'm proud of us or disappointed. Perhaps a mixture of both. That we made it through the entirety of Creep 2 without saying the word penultimate even once. Even once.
Well, we had a lot on our mind during Creep 2.
a lot of very exposed things. There were a lot
between towel snaps and number 2 references, like there was a lot of.
We were really just putting ourselves out there.
Yeah, a lot of personal exposure happening.
Oh my gosh!
One thing I do want to mention before we get too far into the city streets, this Purge night, is if you have not before, guys. Please go rate us, review us, subscribe to us, lest we purge you. So now that is done, welcome back, Reed. Yes, to the 3rd installment of number 2. Whatever we ate has really done a number on us.
This is the number 3 of number 2. So
right.
It's all kind.
Hey, I want to make a little bit of an announcement. Can I do that?
Oh, you've got an announcement. All right, yeah, go ahead.
I've got an announcement. So,
boy, I'm excited.
I was trying to think of something stupid, and remarkably, it didn't come to me in time. So I know it's shocking. But we attempted this for Hereditary a few months ago. It sort of worked. I wanted to give a little more lead time on this. So, I wanted to pitch to listeners the idea of an East Coast meetup for Halloween 2018. It does come out October 18th. So if you are anywhere in the Charlotte reach, we will just anticipate that either the evening of the 18th or the evening of Saturday the 19th, there will be a meetup to watch Halloween all together in theater. Maybe we'll go grab some beverages and wings or something after it. Hopefully it'll be good and worth our time, but the community and fellowship will certainly be so. So yes, a Charlotte area, and that can be, if you're within 90 miles, I would say I'm going to look into hotels. I'm really not going to do that, but do come out for a showing of Halloween. Closer to time, you'll know exactly what kind of time frame we're looking at, but either Friday the 18th or Saturday night the 19th. So yeah, that's exciting. I'm looking forward to that. Reed, you're welcome to come too. You are totally invited and welcome. That would be awesome. So,
I'll see what I can do. On that, since we're just making announcements, I want to also say you've got one more week, guys. One more week to vote on hashtag I love the 80s. We've already had a number of votes come in, and it's really interesting to see how all of these things are shaping up. The Survey Monkey is there, and basically it breaks down your nominated films from the 80s. Your favorite horror films from the 80s are broken down by year, and you pick your favorites from that year. So be sure to go, if you have not already cast your vote, be sure to go and pick your favorites, your favorite films from the 80s, because like we did with the 90s last year, we are going to be revealing your list. We're going to make a top 100 and probably reveal the top 50, and then we will be doing episodes on selections from the top 10. I'm so excited for hashtag I love the 80s.
That is exciting. I'm looking forward to that. In the spirit of number 2, one last bit of business, is that if you are unaware, Quarterly King 4 is right around the corner. It might even be next week, depending on how recording plays out. It might be next week. It definitely will be in the next 2 to 3. So Quarterly King number 4 will be covering The Stand. The Stand, that massive piece of work from 1990, somewhere in there.
It was actually from the 70s.
Really? Why did I think it was from?
Because it takes place in the 90s. So The Stand takes place in the 90s, but it was written in the 70s. I want to say 75, 76.
That's just weird. In my defense, I did read it once before. I have seen the miniseries. Currently, I'm listening to it on audio, so I don't have any
so great
copyright material in front of me or that sort of thing. Regardless, we are covering The Stand. Refresh yourself at minimum to be able to fully enjoy that conversation. But that is not what we're talking about today, Reed.
Not today.
That is not, in fact, what we're talking about today. We are finishing off our number 2 with today's Purge Anarchy. But Woo-wee. I am while we're sitting here on our love toilet, man, the inside jokes are they're just flying. They're just flying. The fear of God jokes. I just gotta know, what are you watching? What are you reading? What are you listening to? I think I'm so insecure about how awesome the mix was you made for 101 that I'm like, why are we even bothering anymore? We can't top that.
We're just gonna replay that mix for every single time. Oh my gosh, it was so fun.
On 101, when you play the medley, how neither of us, when the other is doing it, can stay composed. It's really funny.
No. And my favorite one in there, still my favorite one, is the one where you're just like, what are you watching? What you doing?
I don't know where that came from.
I have no idea. I was like, oh my gosh, this took a turn. Okay, so I don't know if it will still be available by the time, because I don't know exactly what Netflix's like streaming contracts are and blah, blah, blah. But as of this recording, there is a documentary on Netflix called Haunters, subtitled The Art of the Scare. And we're approaching October. We're just a couple of weeks away from October, and Halloween Horror Nights is coming up. I don't know if we're going to be able to make it this year or not, but that's around the bend. There's all the October is the time for all these sort of haunts to arise and all of that good stuff. Well, this documentary sort of digs deep into the psychology, the affection, the fandom for people who create home haunts. It does deal a little bit with Halloween Horror Nights, but that's really not the subject of this. The subject of the documentary is about people who become sort of rabidly obsessed with building home haunts, with these places where people can come just to their home, to their backyard, or to some sort of place that they own, and be able to go through a little haunted maze or a haunted experience. Now, given the subject matter of the film today, this might come back up. It is highly likely that this will come back up. There is a featured home in this documentary that is called McCamey Manor. Have you ever heard of this place called McCamey Manor? I had not before watching this film. I had not. And this particular man, I'm not even going to call what he does a haunted experience. And he receives a ton of criticism from the local community where he resides. He receives a ton of criticism on the internet. He receives a massive amount of criticism from his peers in the home haunting sort of community. And basically their complaint is, dude, you are going to get us shut down. You are going to get us regulated. Like, what you are doing is going to be eventually deemed criminal, and you have to stop. What he does, the best way I could describe it, is basically not necessarily like simulated scares. I'm going to go ahead and call it like simulated torture. And some of it not entirely simulated. His was considered on the list in the film, like it was considered like the most extreme haunt in this entire sort of subset of things that they were doing. And there was a little parentheses on the article that it showed where it said, probably not safe. I want to be, honestly, like some of what I could describe for you right now might upset our listeners. So I'm actually not going to describe all of it. But what he does to these people, I will say the parts that might not automatically upset them. Like when they show up and they sign waivers and stuff, they get smacked and beat around the face. They may get their hair cut or shaved, including beards or eyebrows. They may get their face sort of yanked on, including like if they happen to have some specific dental work that could get ripped out. Like it is the degree to which the people doing this sort of haunt will subject their participants to abuse deeply troubled me. Like really deeply troubled me. And the documentary sort of digs in on that a little bit of like, this is very upsetting. And the reason I'm bringing it up, it's a fascinating documentary. Everybody should watch it. I think it's anybody interested in that subject. Very well crafted, fantastic documentary. I highly recommend the documentary. But when they're exploring this whole McCamey Manor guy, one of the things that I found fascinating is that these people go through these severely abusive experiences, severely abusive and sadistic and masochistic experiences. And when they come out of it, they almost always have one of three results. Number one, they want to sue the guy. They want to bring criminal charges against him, which they can't do because they signed a 20-page waiver, and the people who tried, the police basically said, like, look, dude, you're like, he covered himself. You signed away that he was able to do these things to you. Secondarily, they may want to go through it again, which I do not understand. Like in this weird sort of like, I want to see if I can endure this more. And the third and most troubling reaction is several people then want to work for the haunt so that they can do this to other people. And it's a conversation maybe for another time, or it might come up a little bit later in this conversation that we're having right now. But I was so arrested and unsettled and troubled by that notion of like, hey, this is actually not simulated jump scares, simulated fear, simulated whatever. Like it is a playing out of a version of abuse. And that one of the popular reactions is, I want to now work here and do this to other people. And that whole thing was really sort of, it just left an impact on me. I'm going to leave it there for right now.
So did you like sign up for next summer or something, or like this fall for the Halloween season?
It's so crazy. Like, no, there's no way in God's green earth that I will ever come remotely close to doing this thing. But I will say what kind of gripped and arrested me is it keeps coming up in my mind. He videos the people that do the experience. He videos the whole thing and publishes it to YouTube. It's part of what you sign away. Like he publishes the whole experience of these people to YouTube. So it's all there. Like you could look up YouTube and see these experiences that these people have gone through. And that sort of upsets me a little bit, that I like keep thinking about it and like look it up a couple of times and going like, my God, I cannot believe that people did this, that people did this willingly, and that they do this willingly to other people. So much more to be said about that subject.
Now you've just created stumbling blocks for our entire listenership, because they're like, I want to go look it up now.
Well, listen, I don't blame you, and definitely seek out the documentary. But I will say this: I will almost encourage people who are curious to like maybe dip your toe into the exploratory thing and allow it to. Here's what I would encourage: if you do that, allow it as a moment for serious reflection and reminder that in my opinion, that there is such a thing as, I'll say too far, that there is such a thing as, even for us who watch horror films and talk about Christianity, and we would advocate for a sort of this kind of simulation can be, in proper context, can be fun and entertaining, and in proper context can be to a certain degree psychologically healthy, but that there is a capacity in which it can go too far. And do not, for your own pleasures or for your own entertainment, push yourself too far. And if you do dive down the rabbit hole that is McCamey Manor, think on those things and reflect on how there may be there are certain boundaries and limits to that. I think this is going to come up again, so I may say more on it when it comes up later. But that's what I watched.
All right. Well,
I
just took a number 2.
Too far, Nathan. Too far.
Oh,
just kidding.
I'm too far. Yeah, that does not sound pleasant on.
Oh my gosh, it was so
whatsoever.
Yes.
I mean, as someone who left some number 2 at the Halloween Horror Nights, I don't know what I would do if people started physically accosting me in those scenarios.
Oh my gosh,
I would start.
It was awful.
And you know me, I'm a touchy guy when it comes to hugs. But I want a hug. You start smacking my face and shoving me around, and it's on.
That is exactly what they do to these people. It's so upsetting. Anyway,
that's not cool whatsoever. We need a hugs haunted house. Like, oh hey, come get a hug. I don't know. It's a work.
It's the weakest haunted house ever. What's it?
It's a work in progress.
But you know what's funny about that? Is that actually may be legitimately and authentically scary to people. Like, I don't like.
Oh yeah.
Touched,
Somebody, one of our listeners, was like, "Oh my God, why would I ever go to where people want to hug
walking
me?
out with arms outstretched to hug you?" Yes, exactly.
Hug me. Come get a hug. So one thing I watched recently, Riri, is Unfriended Dark Web.
Oh, you saw? I still haven't seen it. How was it?
I liked it.
Okay.
I think it got slightly overhyped for me. I was listening to a podcast that mentioned it in review fashion that was very praising, and I don't even disagree necessarily with the praises that were foisted upon it. I just was expecting something a little scarier than maybe what I got. It is definitely different in narrative than the first one, which is good. You got to do something a little different. But I think it will surprise me if there's a third one, because I think the formula, the artifice kind of starts to wear thin after a while. You're like, oh yeah, okay, I got it.
Right.
But I think it was decent, and would be potentially interesting fodder for a subsequent conversation of us. But yeah, that's
okay.
That's what I got, Riri. It's no McCamey Manor,
right.
but it is the dark web. That's a dark place too that I don't want to go.
That's true.
There's a theme
web
to this. What you're watching is I don't want to go to these places.
No, that seems to be. It seems to be. Well, I guess that wraps up yet another edition of What are you watching? What are you reading? What are you listening to?
Wow.
I give up. I don't know.
Listeners don't know this, but we're on episode 3 in a row in one night, and we are worn out.
We'll be like, y'all watch Purge Anarchy and tell us what you think. Bye.
I give it 5 pumpkins.
Oh my god.
So here we are at the end of the number 2. We are discussing the Purge Anarchy today.
2.
I had never seen this. Had you only seen it the one time previous to this?
I had only seen it once, so this was my second viewing of it. Yeah.
How do you feel about the Purge Anarchy? Have you seen all of them at this point?
I've seen all of them. Well, no. Sorry, I have not seen the most recent one, the first Purge
right.
thing that was just out in theaters not that long ago. I have not seen that yet. I will say that I think my initial excitement was rooted in sort of expectations, and I'll go ahead and say like my low feelings about the initial entry. Because this time around, so like if we're imagining that I'm going into this second film or coming out of it from a first viewing being like, man, Purge Anarchy is like 4-star film. I love that. I think this viewing probably felt a little bit more like 3.5. So like dinged down a little bit, didn't quite push the buttons that I had remembered it pushing. I still enjoy it more than the first one, and I still think that there's different enough things for us to develop a substantive conversation out of it. At least I hope so. But yeah, I was like, when I went into it, I was like, oh, I think I expected to sort of enjoy this a little bit more. So this was one of those rare moments where a revisitation kind of dinged it down a little bit.
Have you seen that? I think very soon there's going to be a TV series.
Yes. Now I'm very curious about this. It's happening in the fall. It's like a 10-episode limited series that I believe either A&E or somebody, one of the more cable networks are doing. Yes, I'm very curious about that.
Do you know? Is it meant to be like is one season one Purge night?
That's a great question. I don't know. Yeah, I would imagine it'd have to be unless there are going to be episodes that take place years apart, which is entirely possible. But
it's funny. I after watching this one, I did go do a little reading and some interviews and whatnot. I do think the TV series is intended to jump back and forth some chronologically, but I didn't get a handle on exactly what the overarching delivery of a season will be. Is it one Purge night with flashbacks for these characters kind of thing or not?
Right.
I will say this. I mean, like, I think Creep 2 is Creep 2 Blumhouse certainly.
Yeah.
Because Creep 1 is.
Yeah. These are both. Yeah. These are both Blumhouse.
I mean, I will. So what might be heard in my voice is I actually, like you on the first viewing, for me, thought Purge Anarchy was okay. I did not kind of really dig on it as much as I was kind of hoping I would. But I will say this, like, Blumhouse is more than probably we even kind of realize is really blowing it up. I mean, they have expanded beyond that niche little horror house that's making movies. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. They're standard setters now. Now it's
because I don't know if you know this, but they produced Sharp Objects, which is getting a lot of buzz on HBO, the Amy Adams series.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I haven't
and
seen
then
it,
the
but I've heard about
Purge TV series. Actually, it's funny. I think it may have been in relation to Dark Web. It was so, which was also Blumhouse. This same podcast, or maybe it was the same podcast series, just a different episode. They interviewed the makers of Unfriended Dark Web, and they were talking, and it was actually really cool to hear the conversation. They were talking about how freeing working at Blumhouse is compared to a traditional kind of Hollywood setting. That because they, for their traditional features, now who knows if they're morphing the business model a little bit, I don't know, but for their traditional features, they kind of intentionally impose certain creative limitations and not just budgetary. And they were just talking about how, like, when you, I would not be able to just pull out of the air what it costs to make a movie these days, but let's say Black Panther, it costs $300 million to make. I don't know. I think it's probably somewhere in that ballpark, 200, something like that. Let's just say, for sake of argument, if Black Panther costs $200 million to make, and
I don't have $200 million.
Definitely not. An Unfriended Dark Web costs intentionally from the outset $200,000, or let's say $2 million. That's probably more realistic number. $2 million. They were just saying how, like, the $200 million enterprise, there's so much writing on it that it can mitigate the amount of just general fun inherent to the creative process. And they were just really kind of speaking well of the Blumhouse experience, that it is just fun making movies there because, one, when you impose certain limitations, like in the case of Unfriended, the limitation creatively is the only things you see on screen is what's conveyed on a computer camera. It's like, okay, well, now you have some parameters to work with, and it kind of forces you into a certain level of creativity that you might not otherwise have if you can just do anything. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying, I think, though my energy towards Anarchy is a little medium, it does just reinforce how impressed I am with what they are doing overall.
And that's what's so great about that studio is just the idea that, the micro budget model is really where things are going right now, because yes, you spend $2 million to make the film, you maybe spend another $1 million on marketing, you're $3 million invested, right? And then maybe there's some additional costs to actually print the film and distribute it to theaters and stuff like that. You're still at most maybe $5 million in. If domestically it makes $20 million, well, that's 4 times your profit, right there.
Right.
Take 5 of that and go do the same exact thing, and it gives you the freedom to take chances. It gives you the freedom to fail. It gives because like Truth or Dare was not very well received, but they can afford to take that because it's like, well, yeah, sure, we have our Truth or Dares, but then we also have our Get Outs. We've also got our Happy Death Days. We've also got our Sharp Objects.
It's funny you say that because I think in that conversation they actually say it encourages us to embrace failure, like as opposed to seeing it as production house breaking. They're able to see it as kind of formative. What can we learn from this experience, as opposed to, oh, now we have to shut the doors.
And I think what's great about what Jason Blum seems to have done is the impulse would be, okay, great. You made a movie for $2 million. We're going to make the next movie for $20 million. It's going to be even better, which is actually what they tend to do with like franchises and sequels. They expand the budget to be like, oh, well, now the next one's going to be made for $20 million and it'll be that much better and everything. But what he seems to have done seems to have said, oh, great. That movie made $50 million. We turned a $40 million profit off that thing. That is 8 more movies we get to make.
Sure.
So that seems to be how he has sort of turned the game onto its head, is to be like, yeah, we can maybe afford to give the $2 million movie a $5 million budget, but it's still the micro budget analogy.
Right,
it's still
right,
like
right.
we're not going to creep up into the $20 million, and the kinds of stories that they're telling don't really warrant that much. It's like they don't need that much money. Purge Anarchy had a much bigger budget than the Purge did, but it's still relatively small on the scale, and that was just so that they could do some things inside the city, and so it's still this micro budget model that I think is super smart, and I think it's bolstering and encouraging to hear that Jason Blum has managed inside the quote unquote Hollywood system to foster this creative outlet for people to take chances, to take risks, some of which pay off in Oscar wins, some of which everybody's just going to look back and go like, yeah, that wasn't that great. But that's okay.
Sure.
Sure. It's okay because, like you said, they can embrace the failure instead of going, dear Lord, what are we going to do now? Everybody's out of a job and we put all of our money into this and now we don't know what to do. Like, that won't happen. As long as he continues this same model, they are here for the long haul. Like, that's what they'll do now. And it's great. It's fantastic.
Yes.
Bye, everybody.
Well, let's jump into the movie itself. We patted Jason on the back a good bit here. Let's jump into the movie itself. So we did a conversation on The Purge, not but 3-4 months ago, if that. Really great conversation just about that particular film. This one, whereas that film is more bird's eye view, a home invasion story in this new world, where the United States permits one night a year, one 12-hour block a year, any crime is legal, namely marijuana.
That's a big one.
That's a big one.
The Purge 420.
This one
coming to theaters near you. Jason Blum, have I got an idea for you?
To the typewriter. We could sell that to Mr. Blum. And this one is a much more, I think you used this phrase in the first Purge conversation, escape from New York idea. Like, it is on the street, out in a Purge night, and kind of the pitfalls and dangers and that come from that experience for these characters.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I'll start my dislikes with basically like, this is a great cast.
It really is. Yeah, it's pretty killer.
I mean, Michael K. Williams, who I just wrote Omar Coming, that's a Wire reference, shows up. He's the dissident voice. I can't remember the character's name. Michael K. Williams, you got Frank Grillo, you got Matt Saracen, you got Nikki from Lost reference, bingo. I feel like there was one. Oh, Lakeith Stanfield, which I had no idea. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's cool.
Basically a glorified cameo. I mean, he's in it a lot more, but masked, so you don't realize it's him until
right.
in the truck.
So it is pretty cool. And you know what? I don't know what year this came out. Was it like 16, 15?
No, it was 2014.
Okay,
only about 4 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, so still pretty blue cast. Green cast? Okay. Still pretty green cast.
You're thinking of the Smurfs adventure.
Oh my God. I'm not doing much thinking at all right now. But yeah, really great cast. I haven't seen him in much. And I made a joke during Purge 1 conversation about him, or about Crossbones. I like Frank Grillo. I think
very much.
He like, even watching this, you're like, because you and I during one of our watch-a-watchins, one of our rather extended ones, went on and on about Shane Bernthal and Marvel's The Punisher. I mean, he very much is cut from that same cloth, just really has this kind of intensity yet vulnerability. I think he really serves this material well.
Absolutely. My first exposure to him was in a very short-lived TV show called The Gates that was meant to be like a macabre sort of, hey, this is a neighborhood wherein there vampires and werewolves and witches and all these different things live. And he was the sheriff, the completely human and normal sheriff of this town. And that was the first thing that I remember seeing him in. And then, of course, after that, shows up in the Marvel films, and so I think he's very impressive, and I think he's really good in this. He delivers, like you said. He's got that sort of ability to brood. He carries a weariness to him, but at the same time, you're kind of rooting for him. He's that chiseled, like, yeah, this guy's going to do the right thing. I mean, obviously not as Crossbones. But in a film like this, you kind of pull for him. You can tell that he's wearing his grief and his pain on his sleeve, but you still know that he's ultimately gonna, or hopefully, do the right thing. He's great.
Well, one of my favorite scenes is when he's on the elevator and Cap is like, "Are we gonna do this or what?" Or whatever.
I know. I was really surprised that the Purge did this, because I was like, "Wow, man!" Like,
I know
the Cap is out. Like he's Captain America is just like
that. Hey, really is a great scene.
That is a great moment. But Captain America's all like, new founding fathers, like y'all, you ain't seen.
Yeah,
he was like, "Hey,
it's Hydra Cap."
Captain America actually went out and kind of pulled a Jack Nicholson, and he's like, "Oh yeah, new founding fathers, wait till you get a load of me." Like,
wow, there are so many streams being crossed right now. All right, so the Purge Anarchy, we are getting somewhere here. I will say this, so like, despite my relative fuzzy headedness, like, I thought that generally speaking, it's pretty inventive. Sort of, it's a little generic. And I think that's sort of what I felt after watching it, was like, well, if you categorize Purge 1 as home invasion story, while I won't disagree with the criticisms you brought up to Purge 1, I think Ethan Hawke's performance and the concept bring it up a notch on the whole.
I don't disagree.
Whereas with this one, we already know the score going in terms of the concept, so all we're left with is street narrative, and I think it was the narrative left me a little cold. But that said,
sure,
there's, like I said, there's some pretty inventive visuals. There's one moment I loved where it's once the sun has fully set, and I feel like the image is Grillo's character is in the foreground, and just back behind him down effectively an alley, you see this burned out flaming truck just roll by.
That's killer. Yes, it's completely just part of the atmosphere, but that's killer. Yes, this huge truck. I couldn't tell in the moment in this viewing if it was a bus or if it was an 18-wheeler. But I think it's a semi. But I okay, yeah, fully ablaze, just crossing the intersection, and that's really fantastic. And I will say, so like, I have a lot of likes on this film, but one thing that I dislike, and it's no small thing, is I remember being very excited about the fact that it's like, oh, we're gonna get. I forgot, that we're juggling like 3 plot lines. We're juggling Frank Grillo's character. We're juggling the 2 people who've just lost their dad, and it's like all of those things are coming down, and then we have the married couple whose car got broken down, and so they're struggling, and all of these 3 disparate plot lines, and that at first excited me. Then the plot lines converged, and from that moment on, it's a pretty major dislike for me that Keely Sanchez and Zach Gilford, they really do almost nothing with their characters other than a few momentary blips on the narrative. There's not much to speak of about them thematically or narratively. They are struggling, like they're having some troubles as a couple in the first time we see them, and by the end of it, they have sort of resolved
and
that.
Especially because they are a bit more anchor in that first 20 minutes. Yeah, I mean, you're very much kind of in there with them. And I mean, I kept waiting for Grandma Saracen to show up and just give a hug, to somebody.
Say you, I
adore. I love it. Oh,
so
beautiful.
I mean that's one major sort of dislike that I have, is I feel like they kind of waste those characters, particularly because the only one of our protagonists, if you will, that doesn't make it to the end of the film is Zach Gilford. I forget his character's name off the top of my head, but
Matt Saracen.
Yes, Matt Saracen. He's the only one that doesn't survive the night, as it were. So it's even more a shame that they don't do more with them narratively and thematically.
Well, and especially to your point, like, I was a little turned off by where they leave her character. Like,
just there.
It's not that she just gets left there. It's that for what seems to be a movie about the moralistic nature of to purge or not to purge and what that does to us when we do that, remember, she gets left and she's like, I want to purge. Right?
Oh, that's right. That's right. She wants to help.
Because Saracen gets taken out and Landry is very upset. And she
listeners can't see me shaking my head at
I
you.
know. I mean, there's just so many convergences on this movie. It's like The Wire, Friday Night Lights, Lost.
If you haven't seen
Atlanta. What?
Yeah. Brief pause. If you have not seen Game Night, Landry's in it and he's amazing. You need to see it. It's great.
Who knew from Friday Night Lights Landry Clark was going to become the standout?
Oh yeah, star. Yeah, I know.
He has done so much.
Yeah,
he's like a pudgy Matt Damon.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, he's getting lots of great work and in a variety of different types.
Breaking
of roles,
Bad, really Fargo.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Game Night.
Those are great. I love how, like, after that, there's just the crickets. Like, what did he do after that? I don't know. I don't know.
Yes.
Quick, look him up.
So yes. Anyway, the point I was making is just like a little, you were commenting on where it feels like the movie just kind of drops the ball with Nikki and Saracen and where Saracen gets killed by the end of it, and she's like, "No, I want to purge," because I think that's what she's
so confused if they don't know. Listeners are gonna be so confused if they don't know who you're referring to. Oh, it's so awesome. I love it. No, listeners are just gonna be so confused because her name's not Nikki in this film. We were referring to her as Nikki.
No. Lost character.
Matt. Right. Anyway, go ahead. No, Keely Sanchez. Go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah, it isn't just that she gets left and wants to help them, right? She says, I want to purge. Like, and anyway, the point I'm just saying is like, it does feel, the narrative feels a little confused about what to do with the two of them.
But I do, and this will come up in themes, I think that directly creates a contrast between her character and Frank Grillo's character. And we'll get there, I think, when we talk about themes. But
I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see that. Actually, okay, here's a beat I did love, and I would categorize it as a love. I think it was just deft storytelling and scripting and could have easily been missed if you weren't paying attention. I love that when Crossbones is considering helping the two of them,
yes.
I can't think of their characters, but, when he's pondering helping them or not, you already know he's got some misgivings or a backstory about having lost a child.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, his marriage. And when she yells mom, that's his decision point. I was like, oh, that's pretty awesome. It was just a really great beat.
And you know what's really funny is that, like, and I feel like a somewhat similar thing happened when we talked about the first one. It's like I watched the first Purge or not the first Purge, but the original entry in the franchise. I watched all these meta names.
I know.
But I watched the Purge. Didn't like it very much. We're talking about it, and I'm like, you know what? I'm too hard on this movie. There's some good things about it. And like right now in this conversation, because I didn't want, I watched Anarchy for the second time. I was like, oh yeah, that let me down a little bit from what I thought it was. And now we're sitting here talking about it. It's like, oh no, that was pretty good. Yeah, I liked that. Oh, you know what? Maybe that was better than I thought it was. So I think we're just going to wind up talking myself into feeling better about this film than I expected to, because I do like I really do love that moment. And something that I enjoyed the first time around and that I like a lot right now is I do genuinely like Grillo's character and his character's journey. That really, I think, is the heart and soul of this entry in the franchise, is what his character is going through, why he's purging, what he's up against, and his ultimate decision by the end of the night. I think that's really what this film is trying to say, and why I responded to it initially, and even still respond to it more strongly than I did the original entry in the franchise.
Oh yeah, totally. His journey, and I don't know. I just remember thinking when she yells "mom," and clearly that being the decisive moment for him was really strong.
So great.
What could be a bridge to scares, I've got one more item on here too, but I loved the booby trap cable in the street.
Oh my gosh, yes, when it drags him down.
Yeah.
Here's what I remember writing down when he's sitting there, he's like, shoot the cable. I'm like, dude, I could put the gun right up to the cable. I'm probably going to miss this cable.
I know.
Like,
yeah.
there's no way I could shoot that cable. Oh my God.
Unrealistic.
Yes.
Because, I mean, Matty was just a QB. He's not a marksman, you know.
Wow. Everybody go watch Friday Night Lights. You'll love it.
Oh, please do. I will say this. I think part of my ambivalence about the movie is it's far more vignette oriented and ultimately because of that a little disjointed than I liked. Most explicitly illustrated by the game room conceit.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Which I think is a good concept for maybe another Purge movie. I just think it kind of got a little overstuffed by the end.
Yeah.
You know, again, I like the idea. I think it's a great concept. I just think the execution of it, I really was like, I don't know.
Sure. No, I understand what you're saying. And again, what I respond to the most strongly about Anarchy is how it builds upon the themes of the first film, how it finally takes those themes into these extended places. To that end, I do think that they maybe tried to address too many of those ideas in the same film.
Yes.
And maybe that ultimately sort of hinders any of them from having the impact that they would as a singular idea. So yeah, I definitely could see that, but I still admire and appreciate that it went beyond just, you know, the singular home invasion sort of entry, just that one
because
place.
You've got a bunch of different entry points for the Purge concept in this one movie. You've got the dad martyring himself and what the nature of this martyrdom concept is in the world of the Purge, and like that's could be its own sort of, you know, film if we're building a franchise here. You've got the game room concept of rich people basically collecting stragglers and submitting them to these terrible, you know, kind of murder games. Like that's a whole kind of a film unto itself. You've got the weirdo guy who shows up multiple times in the back of the semi truck. Like there's just a lot.
Big Daddy.
Yeah. There's just a lot going on.
Sure.
That I want to give some credit to. I mean, on the one hand, for a movie that's just meant to be traipsing from point A to point B, you've got to mix it up some to keep it interesting. I think ultimately it just kind of starts to struggle a little bit under its own weight.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And of those plot lines, the one that stands out the strongest to me, as I mentioned before, is Frank Grillo's the whole struggle of forgiveness. You've been dealt a severely traumatic blow to your life and health and well-being and your family, and now this is probably pivoting us towards themes. So I'll just hit this, and then we can go into scares if we want.
Hit it and forget it.
I will hit it, forget it. But yeah, that concept of wow, we're tired, y'all. So
bingo.
That idea of you've been wronged, and here's legalized revenge, legalized, authenticated, authorized revenge, and what do you do with that? Because like you said in our first conversation about this, that the film brings up the conversation about what is legal versus what is right. Now that was referring to the first film, but here you go one step further, you know, into these ethics that it's like, yeah, it's one thing if you need to cleanse your soul, air quotes accompany that, if you need to purge these impulses. It's another thing if somebody's like, dude, this guy robbed you of one of the human beings that means the most to you in this world, and in a senseless and horrendous way, that person deserves to pay. So how do you deal with that? That not only would somebody emotionally resonate with that, but now the government has legally sanctioned your ability to go and take care of the problem. And yeah, so I'm sure we'll get back into that in themes.
You're there.
I'm already there.
Any scares you want to talk about, Reed?
You know, it's funny because not a lot stood out to me in terms of like sort of nerve-wracking things, but there was that one moment inside, like when they arrive at the friend's house and they're there, and to be honest with you, I don't quite know how I feel about it, because on one level I'm like, oh, wasn't expecting that. That's pretty great. On another level I'm like, Man, that's like the cheapest, easiest little so and so's having an affair with the sister, so sister gonna go crazy and shoot everybody up. Like, okay, all right, it just felt a little pedestrian in terms of a plot wrinkle, but at the same time, it comes at a point in the narrative where that was the last thing I was expecting to happen. So that's startling and sort of unnerving, as it were. But yeah, I mean, it's honestly not. I don't think any of the films are really the kind of thing that are what I would consider to be scary. There's some, disturbing and upsetting concepts in it, but not a ton of what I would consider to be actually scary or unsettling. So no, I don't have much on my list.
I did think Lakeith Stanfield, before you know it's him, bowing up on Matt Saracen at the car made me jump.
Yeah.
And I think, you used a word a minute ago. You either said unnerving or unsettling, but both apply here. The character Diego in the apartment, when he says, "You pass me by every day," like that sense of kind of entitlement, personality, kind of on full display there.
Yes,
was pretty unsettling. It's funny you were talking about the affair family vignette and talking about the Purge TV show. The almost black comedy version of it is all these little many moments in a given Purge night, and just one character who happens to keep wandering in each of these scenarios.
Like, oh my gosh, I can't escape.
Yeah. I'm just trying to survive the night.
I need new friends.
But yeah, I mean, overall, I'm kind of with you scares wise. I've been trying to process this of why I think I feel more emotionally strong about the first film than I did the second one. I think part of it might be, one, just the first film is your introduction to this world, but also in many ways the Ethan Hawke family of one, and let's give credit here, the Ethan Hawke Lena Headey family of one,
yes,
as well as their neighbors who show up. Like, it's clearly people who are on the top side of this culture's experience, society's experience. And so it sort of beggars a lot more of that, like, what do we do when you're on the top of a culture and you have this sanctioned violence? Whereas this one is kind of within, is almost bottom side, of it. And so the feelings attached to watching it were pretty different.
Sure.
I think all I'm trying to say is The Purge 1 invites a stronger conversation about the concept. Whereas,
because it's an introduction. Sure.
Yeah. Whereas the second one, kind of, you alluded to that, and we can pivot to themes if you want to.
Sure.
What I wrote down, the phrase I wrote down is humanizing vengeance. And I will say this, that this movie gets right. Dude, I hate and get so tired of movies, and you might say just stories in general, but mostly where I see it is film, that glorify vengeance. I'm thinking specifically of this recent Bruce Willis Death Wish garbage.
Oh, yeah.
And that's rather dismissive way to put it, but I remember watching that trailer thinking, that looks terrible. And I've always wrestled, and even though I love this movie, movies like A Man on Fire, right? This notion of the main narrative is about meting out vengeance and quote unquote justice to those who we might say deserve that.
Sure.
One thing I think this movie gets really right is, especially by the end of it, helping you really feel the weight of this character's choices, in a way that maybe only this kind of concept can create. Like, I feel like specifically, and maybe I'm misremembering, but I feel like there's a scene in the car before he goes in.
Yeah. There is one. Yeah.
Yeah. That he's, I don't know. I just have this image of him with his head kind of on a headrest, leaned back with his eyes closed real tight. And you can just see the weight of of the choice he's about to make.
Right.
And, I wrote that word down again, this holiness idea, like when given the opportunity to permissibly mete out what can be construed as justifiable revenge, what do we do? You know?
Right.
And I think the first movie just basically says, when you can do anything on a given night, what do you do with that? This one sort of says, when you can do back to someone what they, you might say, deserve and get away with it, do you do it? And that's
right.
That's a hell of a question.
Well, and it's a distinct contrast from the first one, wherein you could dig into the first film, and I think we did dig in quite a bit in the first conversation about how the people who are victims of this don't deserve it. They just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, unable to defend themselves, not financially capable of arming themselves or something, but they don't really deserve this. And this directly says, like, what if they did? What if there was an individual who actively perpetrated a devastation to the life of someone, and somebody else has the ability to, you know, like basically you've got an avenue through which, you can mete out this degree of vengeance. You can mete out this version of vengeance. And how that strikes me is we can frequently, even in our own compassion, we can frequently say, hey, those people don't deserve that. Stop doing that. But then we may not find it so easy to revoke and reject vengeance when it's somebody who kind of deserves it. And when I don't even say kind of deserves it, when it's somebody who has done something that is recognizably heinous or despicable. And there are people in the world who have done those things and who have, you know, I'm thinking, it's so funny. It must be on my mind more than I'm ready to let on. But like last week, I talked about the James Gunns, the Roseannes, the Donald Trumps. I'm thinking in this conversation of like the Harvey Weinsteins, where it's like where there is a degree, you look at it and you be like, yeah, they deserve consequential action. Now, obviously, something like The Purge is dealing in extremes. So it's dealing in like, this guy lost his child to a drunk driver, a careless drunk driver, and now he has been given a legal abiding right to go and claim that drunk driver's life, to take him out in cold blood. And what must that cost a person? What must that do? It's very, very easy for us, for you, Nathan, and for me to sit here and to advocate for people whose faces we've never seen, names we don't know, the proverbial masses of marginalized and oppressed people. That is very easy for us to advocate for them. It's very easy for us to lift them up. It is much more difficult to sit and advocate for the person or persons who perpetrated something devastating or heinous in our own lives, and to examine of ourselves whether or not we would, if given the opportunity, purge them or pledge them in witches' language.
Well, and I'm gonna. This conversation just popped into my head. Someone close to me, I was having a conversation with recently, and I'm trying to even contextualize this in the moment. But the person I was in conversation with is a person in ministry, a person I respect in ministry, who we were having just some hard conversation, not hard for us, each other to talk about, but just like wrestling with big issues. And his comment was basically like, well, you know, I think it may have even been around kind of death penalty type stuff, big stuff, and wrestling through like, well, it's easy to be against something like the death penalty in the theoretical, but what about when some of this stuff hits you personally and directly? And
right.
And I'm not going to put words in this person's mouth and suggest like, what they were saying is, it's okay to have the death penalty because sometimes you do need it. I don't know that that's exactly what this person was saying, but it did speak to me of like, I mean, any of us can, when I ask the question, who has wronged you in your past? All of us are going to have someone that's going to pop into our heads. And I'm sorry, Reed, just get over it. Okay. I'm just kidding. But,
broadcast therapy.
Right. All of us are going to have someone in our head, and the notion of having to forgive that person is so weighty and fraught for us as individuals. And yet I do think that's exactly where Christ calls us to do our deepest work. And I will say too, that I think the part of the good news to me of the gospel is I have help to do that work. I don't have to manufacture that on my own. I don't even have to complete the task on my own. You know what I mean?
Right,
I have to at least be able to recognize that that task ought to be completed because the grace extended by Jesus covers every individual on the planet and in the cosmos, and thus, who am I to deprive that grace? I know that's really, all of a sudden I just got really
that's
big
fine.
there.
Have it. Have it.
Something else this kind of speaks to me, talking about going from the minute to the monumental here. And this does kind of scratch at some of the stuff we brought up in Purge 1, but I think we should all be extremely dubious of religious nationalism. And what I sort of mean by that in this moment, as it relates to this movie, is somehow construing the law of the land, the law of a land, as to the letter, the law to be abided for us as faithful followers of Jesus.
Right.
And this movie couldn't speak about this more. Like, this person, by rights, I wrote this down and it's just now coming to me. Lorraine, in the affair story, while prepping to kill her sister, says, "This is my right granted to me by my government." Yeah. And, we could say, well, this is an extreme story, and, but there are people right now in the real world who would abide that the government currently operates in such a way that is right and good. And there are people currently in the world who would suggest that the government is not abiding by guidelines that are right and good. So whether you're talking about extremes in the Purge or whether you're talking about more realistic scenarios in the world we live in, there's still going to be variance in sort of thought process and belief about how the government should or shouldn't operate. My point simply is that we as believers, we as followers of Jesus, if we're wanting to be practitioners of faithful living, the government is not our source for that experience.
Right.
And which isn't me proposing, as the film title suggests, an anarchic sort of point of view at all. It's simply saying, well, your government grants you permission to do certain things, but that doesn't mean that you are inherently, it is meant from a faith perspective that you are permissive of doing those things, or the other way around. What your government imposes legally on those who may not deserve it doesn't mean by any stretch that you, as a faithful follower of Jesus, ought to abide, especially philosophically and perhaps tactically and practically, those things. Does that make any sense whatsoever?
Oh, no, it absolutely does. And I keep thinking of the scripture, though I don't have it pulled up in front of me, where Paul talked about...
That's all right. Apparently I paraphrase and you get it right. I'm just kidding.
Oh, my gosh.
Bingo!
Don't passive-aggressively beat up our bingo listeners.
I'm kidding. I actually loved it. I was a little freaked out, but I loved it.
Oh, it was fantastic. But no, I'm thinking of the passage that Paul wrote where he said, all things are permissible to me, but not all things are good for me. All things, I'm allowed to do anything, but I won't let myself be ruled by anything. I won't let myself become a slave to these impulses, to these other things. And I think that's part of what comes to my mind when we think about like this version of what is my right versus what is right. So that's the difference. This what is my right versus what is right. And too many of us can easily become concerned with the my right question versus the what is right. What is right and good to do, and what are we doing to enact and exert that thing? There was a line that Big Daddy said to him when he gets him cornered, like Frank Grillo's character goes, confronts the man that killed his child, and then the moment cuts away, like the movie cuts away, and you're left for a moment with your presumptions. Maybe he, presumably killed him, but we don't know for certain. And he's out there on this lawn, and when he's out there, suddenly that Big Daddy guy shoots him and wanders over to him and says, and I wrote this line down so I made sure that I could say it properly. It says, "There's an unwritten purge rule. You can't save anyone." And I thought this was interesting to me. It's not just about that you can choose to participate in this or not. In this film, it's also about you cannot foster goodness. You can't undermine
right.
the purpose of this. And even more so, he admits hey, yeah, it wasn't working because not enough people were doing it. So we have to go out, and that's why we kidnap people, and that's why the wealthy get to have their little murder games and all of these other sorts of stuff. It's we have to put together basically a task force to go and round up people and set the booby traps and everything like that because not enough people were being killed, which of course solidified the speculations from the first film that this was all just a government ploy to sort of rid itself of the poor and the weak. But it was interesting that he's telling this man... Here's what's fascinating about it. Big Daddy is telling Frank Grillo's character, you can't save anyone. Now, he's referring to the two women that he saved in the sort of, end of the first act of the film. He's referring to that. What he does not know at that point, and does not know fatally for him, is that Frank Grillo has also spared the life of the man that took his child, and that he's also saved him from himself.
Sure.
He saved them. He saved the two women from the predatorial sort of task team that was after them, and he saved the man who was responsible for the greatest tragedy in his life, saved him from himself. You said something earlier, and I forget precisely how you phrased it, but I can remember I had this thought where you said it was something to the degree that our mercy is limited and our capacity for forgiveness is limited, so we have to lean on something beyond ourselves. I forget exactly how you phrased that or how you articulated it, but here's what it made me think. There are certain, just to be candid about it, there are certain things that once I strike upon an idea in my spiritual life and well-being, once I strike upon a phrase or a statement or an idea that is ministerial to me, then I will simply adopt it, and it becomes almost like a ritual to me. And one of my personalized rituals that I've had is if I get into a situation where somebody at work, somebody in my family, a dear friend, somebody that it is important that I maintain a relationship with, something happens and they wound or offend me to a degree that is really extreme, I will pray some version of, Lord, I don't have enough mercy and grace in my heart to forgive them and to move past this. So I need you to grant me some of yours, which operates on this fundamental belief that the Lord's mercy and forgiveness is limitless.
Sure.
And that there is no end to the capacity he has to grant us that should we ask for it. And I think our problem is we just don't ever reach out to the Lord for the things that are automatically beyond us. We will reach out for certain outcomes. I think we have a tendency to say Lord, help me to get through this hard trial, or get through this circumstance, get through this dilemma, let things go well at work, let things go well in my finances. We'll have a tendency to reach out to him for that. We more rarely reach out to him for Lord, I am struggling with forgiveness in my heart for this person, or Lord, I am struggling with affection or doing the right thing by this person or in this situation, and I need, in other words, we don't often ask for wisdom, we don't often ask for mercy towards other people, we may ask for it frequently for ourselves, but we don't often ask like, hey, I need a capacity to forgive this person. Can you grant me that? Maybe if there was some tremendous trauma, we would do that, but not for the little things, not for the guy that cuts us off in traffic, not for the careless friend who is just unmindful with their words and hurt our feelings. We don't often ask for those small little things. And I think the fundamental concept of the purge is the best way to psychological health and the best way to national health is to embrace the violence and exact the violence and enact it. And what I do love, genuinely love about this film is that it introduces like, no, actually there is a better way, and that is that you save people, you help people.
Right.
In the midst of all of this that's going on, that the government has allowed and granted, in the midst of all of that, you still march to this steady drum that says, like, nope, this is not who I am. This is not what I do. The government can sanction whatever it wants, but I will not shift when they say this is the new good, right, and healthy thing. I know it's not. I'm not going to participate in that. And I just love that Frank Grillo is like genuinely struggling with that. I kept wondering why I was forgetting his name, and I looked up his name on IMDb, and he's just credited as Sergeant. So he's not.
Wow.
He's not actually given. He's not actually given a name. But I did have a passage of scripture, and then if you want, we can talk about this a little bit more. Or we can wind this down. I have just two more passing thoughts, but. A passage of scripture that I thought of was Psalm 72. I'm going to start at verse 12 of this. It's referring to Solomon the king, but I loved this language. It says, "For he will deliver the needy who cry out, the afflicted who have no one to help. He will take pity on the weak and the needy and save the needy from death. He will rescue them from oppression and violence, for precious is their blood in his sight." And the language that stood out to me was from verse 14 there. Precious is their blood in his sight. And I thought about that. I was like, wow, we would probably consider our own lives and our own blood to be precious, but how frequently have we looked at the huddled masses, the starving masses, the wealthy masses, the whoever else, whatever station or subset of life that they're in, how frequently have we looked at that group and said, precious is their blood in the sight of the Lord. Precious should be their blood in our sight. Precious should be their well-being, their life, their personhood. It should be precious to us, for we believe that it's precious to the Lord. Going back to that McCamey Manor thing, it struck me as so upsetting and disturbing that one of the common reactions to people who endure it is, now I want to do this to somebody else.
Yep.
Now I want to pass this along. Because I feel like we have a fundamental schism where we do not necessarily naturally view the lives and the blood and the circumstances of other people as precious. That's why I loved that language of the Psalms. We don't view them as precious, and because we don't view them as valuable or precious, we view them as expendable and disposable, and as outlets or avenues for our ire, our frustration, for our vengeance. We view those people as somehow disqualified from the mercy, grace, well-being, and wholeness that the Lord has offered to us. And because we view them as less than that, and because we view them, and sometimes we, as Sergeant easily could have for the person who claimed the life of his son, we can say like, well, they brought that on themselves.
Right.
They did that themselves. Right. And as we've identified before, I don't think that that's the posture Christ wants us to adopt. I think Christ wants us to adopt a posture of like, hey, they are precious to me. Their well-being is precious to me. And even the depths and the atrocities and the heinousness of their sin does not eradicate their preciousness in the sight of the Lord. And that is something that I think we would do very well to be mindful of when, in the film, it's talking about the government sanctions it. But it doesn't matter who sanctions it. It doesn't matter whether your parents did or whether your friends and peers do or whether your community does or whether, some organization to which you belong. It doesn't matter whether the church sanctions it. Like if something is, I'm thinking of like these whole subgroups of like neo-Nazis and entire groups of people that will adopt certain ideologies and personas, and I'm thinking of the Catholic Church that has condoned and covered up all of these tragic abuses and everything. It does not matter who sanctions it. It doesn't matter if the government covers it up. It doesn't matter if the church covers it up. It doesn't matter if your peers have covered it up. We have a need and a responsibility to view the lives of those we would otherwise hate as precious because the Lord views them as precious. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Two final thoughts of my own. Like, one thing I wrote, I appreciate your contextualizing the end again for me, because I'd forgotten why this phrase matters, is when Big Daddy says what he does, and then who is Grillo's child's killer, inadvertent or otherwise, comes out into the light of the morning, and you as the viewer are like, oh wow, that's because I didn't know where the story would end. Like
right, of course. Yeah.
I was kind of ready for him to have done the deed, and just because when it looks like he's going to get killed by Big Daddy, it's like, well, yep, kind of the moralistic scale balancing that seems to be right if he did kill this other guy. Right. But what I wrote down is that we only ever win by saving each other. And I think that, to your point, and what you were kind of articulating that I'd said, so I was in this conversation with this person, and whether it was a death penalty or something like it, and the notion of when someone else uniquely or someone else corporately has inflicted pain and damage to us, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? That's where, it's all, people who would contend for, like, say, the death penalty. Oh, well, they did this thing. Like, okay, yeah, I mean, naturally, that's what is supposed to now happen, And I just think there's a reason the concept of mercy would fall for me in the column of a supernatural virtue. It is not we have the capacity to show mercy. There are limits to that capacity insofar as Grillo's character, for example. I don't think this is a praying man, but in his own strength, he didn't quite have enough in him to extend full mercy to this person.
Right.
Yes. And it required us buying into the story and him giving himself over to the availability of mercy to perhaps himself, but definitely to this other person, that would permit him. We're talking about permissiveness, that would permit him to say, no, this is not a thing I need to do. And I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I don't think ultimately that this movie had as profound an effect in its kind of philosophy or philosophizing as the first one did. But I do think there was a lot of strength to it. Some of the minutia starts to bog it down a little bit for me, though.
Yeah, I can understand, and I can sit with that as well. But I do think that, it's as a final button, we'll bring in David S. Pumpkins, and then we will wind it down. I do think that this is going to sound super cheesy, but I mean, oh God, okay, I'm just going to say it. Prepare to roll your eyes, listeners and co-host. This is the thing that we're talking about this idea of forgiveness, and we're talking about that scripture verse is rattling around in my head, their blood is precious in his sight. And here's the statement that keeps coming to me, and it's cheesy and silly because of the cross and because of what we know of the cross. But this is what I was going to say. Forgiveness has blood on its hands, but not of the people that are forgiven. It has its own.
Sure.
Forgiveness has its own blood on its hands. And what that speaks to me, I know that it's something of a clunky or cheesy idea, but what that speaks to me is forgiveness hurts. It hurts. It hurts almost as much as it heals, and it costs almost as much as it gives back. But it is the proven path to wholeness and well-being, and we do ourselves a grave disservice to pretend that it is easy or to pretend that it doesn't cost everything. A film like The Purge, Anarchy, it just illuminates for me that, yeah, there is a tremendous self-cost to making the active choice to forgive another human being of an atrocity, great or small. And we should keep in mind that yes, there will be scar tissue, there will be pain, but if we're willing to bear that cost itself, then yes, we may walk away with the scars, but we'll walk away with the freedom as well, and with the lighter burden that has been granted and gifted to us. And I love that this film ends with the dawning of the new day.
Yeah.
And where is it? We'll end on this button. Where is he going? He's being taken into a place where they will tend his wounds, and they will, that like he is about to literally go through recovery. And who drove him there? It's the man that he set out at the dawn of the night to eradicate him. And that man drove him there. And yeah, it's a simple little thing. I mean, it's a simple little narrative nugget, but it's significant to me, in this idea and understanding of forgiveness and how we work it out and what it costs us to get there. So,
amen, amen, brother.
So why don't we go ahead and bring in old David's Pumpkins? So as we do every episode, we're going to measure this on style, scares, and substance. Mr. Nathan Rouse, what do you give to The Purge, Anarchy in the measurement of style?
I actually stylistically like a lot about it. I'm going to give it a 3.5.
All right. I actually am going to sit right there with you with a 3.5. I can't remember what I gave the first film. I'm really hoping that I gave this film higher than the first one, because I do think I like it a little bit more. But yeah, 3.5 is kind of feels right for style, as it were. For scares, I mean, this one's even sort of, like you said, digging into the premise, this one's even sort of less so upsetting or unsettling than the first film was. And even though there's some tension, it's not a terribly scary film. So I'm going to land on like a 2.5 for scares.
Well, you know what? You sat with me at 3.5. I'm going to sit with you at 2.5.
Oh,
now, for me personally, for substance, I think what is nice about The Purge, and presumably entries beyond the second one kind of keep up here, like it is ripe with, sort of substantive potential. I mean, I think that's
sure
what people respond to and why it's become a hit franchise, for one. But so this one's narrative is a bit more straightforward, but I think the journey of Grillo's character is where the heartbeat of the film is. And so from that standpoint, I think substance-wise, I'm going to land at a 3.5.
All right. I'm going to just give it a slight nudge up, and I'm going to land at a 4 for substance. I think the film's grasp is a bit beyond its reach, or reach exceeds its grasp. I forget exactly how to do that. You know what I'm trying to say, listeners. I think that the film aims for more than it can actually grab onto.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, I'm gonna land at a 4. But I also, like, the reason it's as high as a 4 is because I do think it's genuinely and intentionally aiming for some interesting things. And I have come to appreciate how The Purge as a franchise seems to be wrestling with this moral center.
Yeah.
I have come to really appreciate that. More so in these 2 conversations that we've had on the show than I did in just viewing the franchise in a bubble. I think it does.
Do you like election
engage
year?
with? I do. It's funny because I initially liked Election Year slightly more than the first one, but not as much as Anarchy. But the experience of rewatching Anarchy has made me go like, well, how would I feel about Election Year right now?
Right.
But I do enjoy it. I can tell you Sargent is in it.
Really?
Frank
Cool.
Frank Grillo's character is in. He's once again a main character as opposed to just a cameo. Like he is a primary character in that story. And so, I mean, again, if you've enjoyed, I would say this to listeners and I would say this to you, Nathan, if you have enjoyed these films to the degree that you're like, hey, I like them, they've given me some stuff to think about, I think Election Year it's worth your time. And, I like where Election Year lands. I'll just say that. I like where Election Year lands. But, so that not only puts a wrap on our conversation about Purge Anarchy, but I think it is
wipes away this series too, doesn't it?
It wipes away the series. I'm not. No comment. No comment. It is time to pull the lever. It is time to wash our hands of these episodes. And move on from hashtag number 2. So, you know what? I cannot believe this. I didn't even say, but we gave The Purge Anarchy 6.5 out of 10 David S. Pumpkins. We gave it all our measurements, and then we didn't even say.
Yeah.
6.5 out of 10 David S.
Our
Pumpkins.
legs were falling asleep, so we had to get up.
I do hate that moment where you're like, oh God.
I love you, just made it real. Like, no, really, that sucks.
Where it's just like, oh man, I made a grave miscalculation. So anyway,
I waited like a minute too long.
Oh my God. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, please go, if you have not already, vote on hashtag I Love the 80s. October's series absolutely depends on your participation. So go vote on hashtag I Love the 80s. Nathan, thank you so much for having this conversation with me, for staying up so late, and for enduring the Purge Anarchy and this series. Number 2.
It's all right. I can live with it.
we should go for another one. Okay, so no, I'm just kidding. Listeners, thank you so much as always for
make it a regular thing.
Yeah.
We'll see you next week, everybody.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And you can continue the conversation in a variety of ways. You can follow us on Twitter @TheFearOfGod. You can like and follow us on Facebook or join the Facebook Fear of God discussion group. You can follow us on Instagram @Fear of God Podcast. Go to morethanonelesson.com for show notes or to leave a comment on this post or any of the other official episode posts. Email us at fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. And last but not least, if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating or review. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.